Have you noticed lately, just these past few years, that when you go out into the night to look at the sky, there doesn't seem to be as many stars as when you were younger? All those constellations that you loved so fondly have grown harder to find. And every so often, when you think you've spotted it, you'll see one of those stars moving very slowly across the sky. Well, you're not alone, because astronomers, even at the darkest corners of the Earth, supposedly free of light pollution from the surface, say that their deep space telescopes can't see as far as they used to due to these floating lights. And every so often, something large and metallic will block their view completely: a satellite. While this may seem unimportant, just an unfortunate reality of Earth's changing relationship with outer space, this is far from the case. Because right now, there is a massive satellite network expanding rapidly above all of our heads, backed by the world's richest men. And it threatens to steal stars from our sky, deplete our ozone layer, and could cause such severe cascading disaster in orbit that it could trap humanity on Earth forever. This is the cosmic horror of the Starlink Mega-Constellation. Hi everyone, welcome back to Absolutely Not, the channel where I talk about things that keep me up at night. If you're new here, welcome. If you're not new here, you're lying. My name is Abby. I have a master's degree in international conflict and cooperation, and I really do enjoy the research that I do and trying to present it in a way that's fun despite how much of a bummer it is. And so I really appreciate you clicking on this video, and I hope you enjoy your laundry or gardening or cooking or cleaning or whatever you're doing while this video plays in the background. To get started, what exactly is the Starlink Mega-Constellation? And you've probably heard of it in some capacity. Either its use in Ukraine and Taiwan, or maybe you live somewhere remote and Starlink is the best form of internet for you, or maybe you've seen just how many of these rockets have exploded on the launch pad recently while trying to send up these satellites. Either way, it's important to know that the Starlink Mega-Constellation is the crown jewel of SpaceX, obviously owned by Mr. Elon Musk himself. In the process of this midlife crisis, the Starlink Mega-Constellation has accrued almost 7,000 satellites in orbit, which now account for over half of all active satellites surrounding the planet, which is great because they're all owned by Elon Musk. And to kind of set the stage for this, it's important to note that everything that SpaceX does, it does with the express permission and with the funding of the US Department of Defense. I'm not calling it the Department of War, the Department of Defense. And so, with noting that these things have been done with the permission of the US government, we're looking at SpaceX as sort of a defense company, kind of like a Boeing or a Lockheed Martin, because I think it was in 2024, SpaceX got 13 billion in US grants. And that is a lot of money that could have gone to healthcare, but it didn't. Also, under the Outer Space Treaty of 1967, everything done by a private company in the US in space is thus the responsibility of the United States itself. Now, I could talk at length about the use of SpaceX in land wars in Ukraine, how it might be irresponsible to have the world's richest man be the end all be all in deciding who gets internet in a land war, speaking that Starlink terminals can be disabled remotely, and there have been instances where this has not been advantageous for Ukraine. But that is for another video. Today we're talking about SpaceX and Starlink as a physical entity, as the satellite constellation itself, and how that affects terrestrial environment, space environment, and the world as we know it. In talking about this, it's first important to understand what Starlink satellites are made out of. They are small aluminum-based satellites that are mass-produced and mass-deployed. One Falcon 9 rocket can deploy 20 to 30 of these satellites at once. It is also worth noting that each of these Falcon 9 launches produces about 395 transatlantic flights worth of carbon emissions. Since Starlink began launching in 2019, the landscape of outer space has completely changed around the world, because now we have Mega-Constellation plans popping up everywhere. I'm talking on every single continent. There's a plan to deploy a Mega-Constellation. And what this has done is it has significantly increased the number of satellites that are currently orbiting the planet. And that raises issues for re-entry, and that raises issues for space crowding in orbit. Because one of the major issues with deploying so many things in space is the production of debris. which we will talk about in a second. But first, let's talk about the reentry thing. So, the way that the United Nations recommends that we dispose of satellites once they've completed their mission is through reentry, which is where a satellite comes back down to Earth and vaporizes the ionosphere due to the heat of it coming back in, and then just turns to in the atmosphere and thus doesn't hit anybody or hit the ground. Usually, howdy doody, what can go wrong, right? A lot of things can go wrong. For example, when we started making these rules about how many satellites could come back in, we were having about 50 re-enter a year. Now we have 4 to 5 Starlink satellites re-entering every day. And these are made out of aluminum. And so when they catch on fire and vaporize, they turn into aluminum oxide, which is a compound known to deplete ozone. And what this also does is it causes atmospheric cooling, because when you have that much aluminum oxide being dropped in the upper ionosphere, this gets colder while the atmosphere that we're hanging out in gets warmer. And that creates a barrier where the heat can't get out. And so Mr. Climate Guy, Mr. Electric Car Guy, putting us in an oven, essentially, and encouraging the rest of the world to put us in an oven as well. Because when the US does something big in space, everybody else tries to do it. So now we have 4 to 5 Starlink satellites coming in every single day and dropping around 30 kilograms each of vaporized um, aluminum oxide. And what this does also is that we can't really get rid of it. And so it hangs out in that upper ionosphere for about the next 30 years, which is when we'll start to feel the effects of this happening. It's going to be a delayed gratification, but it's coming. And to calm some of the worries about this, aluminum oxide is naturally occurring in our atmosphere because of meteorites. When we have a meteor shower, that's caused by the Earth going through a debris field of a comet, and most of these are made out of metallic material, often aluminum. And so there is a natural limit to the amount of aluminum oxide that the atmosphere can handle. However, studies coming out of MIT suggest that the amount of aluminum oxide being released by these satellites well exceeds those natural limits, and thus will begin to interact negatively with our ozone layer. The way that Starlink interacts with our climate is that not only on these launches are we producing an incredible amount of emissions, but when they're coming back in, we have to deal with all of this metallic material then building up in our atmosphere. And that is something that we have not studied because this is unprecedented. This is the largest satellite network ever conceived, obviously, because the space age is not that old. This only started in the mid 1960s. And the Outer Space Treaty wasn't even signed until 1967, and it hasn't been updated since then because nobody's agreed to sign anything else except for the Artemis Accords, which I can talk about in another video because the Artemis Accords are just kind of like a free pass for the US to break the Outer Space Treaty, which is great, to establish US dominance in outer space. Yay! Oh my god. Because we haven't updated any laws on this, there's no regulation to how many satellites that you can put up in space. You can put up as many as you want. You just have to tell the International Telecommunications Union, and you can put up 50,000. How do I know that? Because Starlink plans to put up 42,000 of them in the next decade. And so one of the issues that we're running into here is that these Starlink satellites are very short lifespan. They're meant to go up for 3 to 5 years, and then this design has then been repeated by the rest of the world and other satellite constellations. Keep in mind, Starlink is the only one that's even breached 1,000, and it takes up most of orbit. Another thing is that when we have this much aluminum oxide building up in our atmosphere, there are some studies that are quite concerned about what this could do to Earth's magnetic field. Because when you have all of this metallic material and conductive material on Earth, and then you put it up in the sky, there are theories coming out of the University of Iceland that this could really seriously damage our magnetic field. Because our magnetic field is already weakened to an extent because of the natural process of pole shifting, in which in the next few hundred years, our magnetic poles will shift. And because of this natural weakening, it's theorized that this metallic material, this conductive material, going up in the sky may seriously damage Earth's ability to protect itself from solar flares and electromagnetic storms, which would then cause atmospheric stripping, which is what happened to, for example, Mars. Mars or Venus or any other rock planet that's now just a dust planet. So, because our magnetic field is what protects our atmosphere, which allows us to have life. So that's cool. And to be not so doom and gloom about that, the study that's coming out of the University of Iceland is not widely agreed upon right now. So I'll actually edit on a tinfoil hat retroactively for that one. So you're probably thinking, well, Abby, is there a way to prevent this? What if we just kept them in orbit, kept them going? We didn't have them come down and re enter. Boom, bada bing, bada boom. No pollution. Wrong. Because if you leave satellites in orbit, that increases the risk of orbital debris. And what orbital debris is it's just fragments of old satellites, any old transport material, pieces of like the space shuttles that used to like jettison off. And these things are still in orbit because there's not really a way to get them down right now. Currently, the best method of getting rid of space debris is like a net, like a butterfly net. What space debris does is it causes overcrowding. And overcrowding is an increasingly dire issue in orbit right now as we're seeing all of these new satellites go up. Because when you go up and you deploy 20 to 30 satellites at once, it increases the risk of collisions. And what collisions can cause is something called Kessler syndrome. And if you have watched the movie Gravity, it's what happens in the movie Gravity. So I've been told. I have not watched the movie Gravity and actually can't vouch for it, but I hope it's a good movie. I'll watch the movie. I'll watch the movie. What Kessler syndrome is the theory of cascading destruction in orbit, in which two satellites collide and explode, and then all of the fragments of those satellites go and hit other satellites, causing a explosions to surround the planet, meaning that we would not be able to send anything up into space for hundreds of years, if not indefinitely. And our world has become incredibly reliant on satellites. We use satellites for weather tracking, we use satellites for GPS, we use satellites for communication, for a countless number of things, both scientific, military, and civilian. And I'm trying to ask you this: if you think that this would not affect you personally if the satellites all went kaboom at once, which would happen very, very quickly should two of these satellites collide in the correct fashion, riddle me this. Picture it. You're in Miami. It's 3 a.m. You just got done at the, okay, maybe it's 5 a.m. You just got done at the club in Miami. You need to call an Uber. You need to get out of there, but Kessler syndrome is manifesting. What are you going to do when Kessler syndrome manifests and you're in Miami and you can't call an Uber because you don't have GPS anymore? You also don't have a map. Nobody knows what's going on. Nobody knows where we're at. No maps, comma, you're in Miami. Or even worse, you're in Houston. Oh my God, even worse, you're in Houston. And there's not even like a reliable, you can't even walk anywhere. So if Kessler syndrome were to manifest in the modern day, it would probably set technology back to around the 1960s. And I wish I was joking. But this is a concern that has been echoed throughout the United Nations and throughout every space agency across astrophysics. This is a very real thing to be concerned about, especially when you see all of these Falcon 9 rockets exploding on the launch pad. How do we trust that they're going to deploy these satellites correctly and that nothing is going to collide? We even had, back in 2021, Russia test an anti-satellite missile in which it exploded one of its own defunct satellites. And that caused evasive maneuvers to be necessary for both the Tiangong and the International Space Station. Because had they not done those evasive maneuvers and that debris from that satellite had hit the International Space Station, the Tiangong Space Station, we would have lost not just the asset of the space stations themselves, but everybody inside. It would have killed all of these astronauts and would have started that cascade of destruction. And that's why we haven't seen so much exploding of satellites from Earth, because everyone around the world knows that destruction of space assets, for one, means destruction of space assets for all. This would not be specific to the United States. This would be worldwide, that we could no longer use outer space for anything. The manifestation of Kessler syndrome would completely destroy our ability to use outer space, probably forever. Because right now, there's no viable way of really getting rid of outer space debris. And I think one of the more tragic aspects of what these satellite constellations are doing, not just the Starlink constellation, although this is the primary offender, is what it has done to the field of astronomy. Astronomers around the world say that they cannot see as deep into space as they once did, and they cannot conduct the research that they should be able to conduct. I think, as someone who just really loves outer space and loves learning about it, it feels so personal to have something attacking the beauty of it for the sake of money and for the sake of power and for the sake of influences. Because I think at the end of the day, we had a world before mega constellations that was functioning, that was fine. These things are not necessary, although they are useful. We have something now that is surrounding the planet that could end our use of space forever, that is going to destroy our ozone layer, because we already have 7,000 satellites up there. They have to come down. And that has all been done unnecessarily for power, money, and influence. And you're probably thinking to yourself, wow, Abby, this really bums me out. And it does bum me out too. I think, especially in how the world is functioning today and the way that we see politics going and the way that we see the world events going. And I think that it is important now more than ever to maintain hope and to maintain a love for yourself, a love for your community, a love for your life. Continue to be informed. And if you learned anything in this video, I really do encourage you to start a conversation with a friend about how the space sector as an industry and as a military objective is so much more destructive than what meets the eye. Because these are things that are not going to make the news. These are things that are not going to be talked about in the mainstream media, but they're important nonetheless. So I encourage you to start a conversation, to share this video with your friends if you enjoyed it, and more than anything, never stop learning. And with that, if you are curious and you want to learn more about these things, I have some book recommendations. The first one, if you don't want to be bummed out and you just want to learn a little bit more about space, this is The Milky Way by Moya Mictier. And Moya Mictier is an astrophysicist and a folklorist, and she is a beautiful, beautiful writer. This is an autobiography of the galaxy told from the perspective of the Milky Way herself, and she's a little bit of a diva. And I really do love this book. It is such a nice read and very informative. It's like you learn not just about the Milky Way from a scientific perspective, but also from like a folklore perspective, which I just think is really, really cool. And so Moya Mictier, fantastic author. I haven't read any for other books. I'm not sure if she has any other books, but if she does and you've read them, let me know down below and I'll check them out. If you do want to be bummed out, I recommend Dark Skies by Daniel Dudney. This is a resource that I used a lot in my research for my dissertation, and I don't recommend that you buy it. I recommend that you look for it at your community library or at your university library. If it's not available, ask your librarian to order it in for you. But it's a fantastic book. It's more about space expansionism and the ends of humanity. If you like to get more into the nitty gritty of the kind of darker side of this, the dark skies. But he's a fantastic researcher, fantastic author. So I highly recommend his works as well. And with that, remember to take care of yourselves, like, share, and subscribe if you liked this video, and come back next time where I encourage you to smoke cigarettes in my next video. All right. Have a good day, everyone. Bye.